I know.
So much more honest about that. Sarah, she tells us, or Stephanie, she tells us 2 minutes and 10 minutes.
We're ready, John? Whenever you're ready, we'll kick it off. I was thinking about not doing a briefing today, and then I saw Reince Priebus and Steve Bannon give that talk, and I thought they were infringing on my ratings, so we figured we had to do something to keep up our record. It's been another busy day today. This morning, after receiving his daily intelligence briefing, the President welcomed some of the world's top business and manufacturing leaders to the White House to continue the administration's effort to engage with the private sector to create jobs and expand opportunities for America's workers. The 24 CEOs spent the morning in working sessions with the Vice President, cabinet members, and key aides, and came together with the President to brief him on their discussions and recommendations. The group discussed the need to roll back burdensome regulations that are stifling economic growth. The CEOs thanked the President for the actions that he's already taken to address the issues, and the President pledged to do even more, both through the executive branch and by working with Congress to pass legislation that will help further economic growth and job creation. The business leaders recommended that the administration take a multifaceted approach to tax and trade policies, including tax reform, toward which Secretary Mnuchin said that progress is continuing to be made. The President committed to working to lower taxes and level the playing field with other countries when it comes to trade and taxation. The group held a lengthy discussion about the need to invest in the American worker to prepare for the manufacturing jobs of the future, especially the key role of vocational schools in training the workforce of the 21st century. The CEOs and administration officials agreed that public-private partnerships will be the cornerstone of a robust plan to rebuild the nation's crumbling infrastructure. The President committed to streamlining and a permitting process that is holding back so many key projects. At the end of the discussion, the group expressed their excitement for having a true partner in economic growth in the White House, and Andrew Liveris, the CEO of Dow Chemical, even said that this is probably the most pro-business administration since the Founding Fathers. The President conveyed his intention to assemble the industry leaders on a regular basis to discuss progress toward these important goals. A full list of the participants is available. This afternoon, the President spoke with Canadian Prime Minister Trudeau by phone. We'll have a readout on that call soon. Right now, many of you just came from the President, who is involved in another listening session with leaders in the fight against domestic and international human trafficking, including representatives from International Justice Mission and the United Way. Their expertise will be invaluable to the President as he engages with members of Congress to raise awareness about and push through legislation aimed at preventing all forms of the horrific and unacceptable practice of the buying and selling of human lives. Human trafficking is a dire problem both domestically and internationally, and solving this epidemic is a huge priority for the President. Dedicated men and women from across the federal government has focused on this for some time, and the President is committed to continue working with these organizations and departments. A participant list for this listening session is also going to be available. The President this evening will attend a dinner with the Business Council. Today in Mexico, Secretary Tillerson and Kelly had productive meetings at the cabinet level with officials from the Mexican government. They were forward-looking meetings focused on finding common ground, ways to advance both of our country's security and economic well-being. Both sides had a candid discussion on the breadth of challenges and opportunities as part of the U.S.-Mexico relationship. The conversation covered a full range of bilateral issues, including energy, legal migration, security, education, exchanges, and people-to-people ties. The parties also reiterated our joint commitment to maintaining law and order at our shared border by stopping potential terrorists and dismantling the transnational criminal networks that are moving drugs and people into the United States. Under this President, there is no mistaking the rule of law matters along both sides of our border. Both Secretary Tillerson and Secretary Kelly are meeting with President Peña Nieto this afternoon. That will be a continuation of the productive dialogue that is setting our two countries down a pathway to greater security and long-term prosperity. Looking ahead to our upcoming schedule, tomorrow the President will welcome President Peru for a working-level visit. The President of Peru is in town for a separate visit and requested a meeting with the President. There'll be a spray at the top of that. Further guidance will be provided later today. The President will also speak at CPAC tomorrow. I know the President's looking forward to addressing this group of conservative committed individuals. Our nation's governors are starting to gather in Washington this week for a meeting of the National Governors Association. The President and the First Lady will welcome the governors to the White House on Sunday evening. The Vice President and members of the Cabinet will also be in attendance. While the governors are in town, they will be meeting with members of the Cabinet, White House staff, and other secretaries, including Kelly, Price, and Secretary Chow, have also set up a series of meetings. The President, Vice President, and senior White House staff will also participate in a portion of the business session of NGA's winter meeting that takes place on Monday morning. Next week, of course, the President will give a joint session address before both houses of Congress. He's currently working closely with the speechwriting team on presenting his vision to Congress and the American people. I've got a few updates that I want to just, as we're now a few days out. The theme of the address will be the renewal of the American spirit. The address will particularly focus on public safety, including defense, increased border security, taking care of our veterans, and then economic opportunity, including education, job training, health care reform, jobs, and tax and regulatory reform. With that, I'll be glad to take a few of your questions.
Sure.
Yes.
Thank you.
Two questions. First, the White House said previously that travel ban was pushed quickly out of necessity for national security, and now we're hearing there's these repeated delays while the new one is being drafted. How do we reconcile those two talking points? That's question one. And then secondly, the President said today that the deportations taking place under his watch are a military operation.
Right.
Secretary Kelly said the military won't be involved in deportations. Did the President misspeak?
No, so I'll take the latter first. The President was using that as an adjective. It's happening with precision. And in a manner in which it's being done very, very clearly. I think we've made it clear in the past, and Secretary Kelly reiterated it, what kind of operation this was. But the President was clearly describing the manner in which this was being done. And so just to be clear on his use of that phrase, and I think the way it's being done, by all accounts, is being done with a high degree of precision and in a flawless manner in terms of making sure that the orders are carried out and it's done in a very streamlined and efficient manner. I'm sorry, the first part was?
The first one was about the travel ban.
Yeah, I think, look, we have made it very clear that we believe that the first one was done in compliance with U.S. Code and the authority granted to the President. This time, the order is finalized. What we are doing is now in the implementation phase of working with the respective departments and agencies to make sure that when we execute this, it's done in a manner that's flawless. And so it's not a question of delaying. It's a question of getting it right. We've taken the court's opinions and concerns into consideration, but the order is finalized. It's now awaiting implementation. What we want to do is make sure that we're working through the departments and agencies so that any concerns or questions are answered on the front end. But we are acting with appropriate haste and diligence to make sure that the order is done in an appropriate manner. Yeah.
I want to ask you about a comment that the Treasury Secretary made today. He was asked if we should assume that the tax plan that the President is about to roll out will take effect in 2018, and he said, and I'm quoting, "I think we're looking at that." So my question to you is, would the President accept a tax proposal that deals with a timeline of implementation in 2018, but not 2017?
So the Secretary Mnuchin also made it very clear that his goal is to have this wrapped up by August and implemented. And the question is, or what you're referring to is what year it actually takes place, right? So whether it's retroactive to tax year 2017 or fiscal year 17. And I think as the details we'll have more details on that as it moves forward. I think there's two issues: fiscal year 17 and calendar year 17. And for taxpayers, it's obviously calendar year 2017 that they're probably most concerned with. And I think the President, as we work with Congress, will have those details to be able to flesh out. I want to go to our first Skype seat of the day, Neil Vigdor with Hearst Connecticut Media Group.
Good afternoon, Sean. Thanks for taking my question. Appreciate it. Connecticut's governor directed police chiefs across the state Wednesday to avoid taking any special action against undocumented immigrants, including honoring immigration detainer requests from ICE. What will the repercussions be for the state in terms of federal funding it receives from the Trump administration? And secondly, does the president's executive order on sanctuary cities apply to those that are undeclared sanctuary cities?
Well, Neil, I think there's a couple things. The idea that Governor Malloy would not want the law followed as enacted by Congress or by the Connecticut legislature in any fashion seems to be concerning, right? You whether you're a governor or mayor or the president, laws are passed in this country, and we expect people and our lawmakers and our law enforcement agencies to follow and adhere to the laws as passed by the appropriate level of government. So it's obviously concerning, I think, and it's troubling that that's the message that he would send to his people and to other governors, because we are a nation of laws, and I think that people need to understand that whether it's the laws that he passes as the governor of Connecticut or the laws that are passed through Congress and signed by the president, there's a reason that a democracy works. It's because the people speak, our representatives, at every level pass a law, and the executive in that particular branch of government signs or vetoes it, and then we live by those rules. And the idea that you can decide which laws to agree or not to agree with, or follow or not follow, undermines our entire rule of law. And so I would suggest that is not a great sign to be sending to the people of Connecticut and the people of this country, that a particular governor chooses not to follow the duly passed laws of this nation. With respect to sanctuary cities, I think this is an area that the American people, by huge amounts, support. They recognize their tax dollars shouldn't be spent supporting programs and activities which people are not entitled to. And so I think the president has been very clear on this, that if you are a sanctuary city, declared or undeclared, if you are providing benefits or services, we're going to do everything we can to respect taxpayers and ensure that your states follow the law. April?
Sean, on the bathroom issue.
Yeah.
There was a different comment from the president about, if people like Caitlyn Jenner wanted to use this bathroom in Trump Tower, she could. Now, what's happened?
No, I think that's, so just to be clear, the president was asked at one point, Caitlyn Jenner was in Trump Tower, and he said, that's great. That's consistent with everything he said. It's a states' rights issue. And that's entirely what he believes, that if a state wants to pass a law or a rule, or an organization wants to do something in compliance with the state rule, that's their right. But it shouldn't be the federal government getting in the way of this. I mean, if you look at this, the law that was passed in 1972 did not contemplate or consider this issue. Number two, the procedure for this guidance letter that was done through the Obama administration was not properly followed. There was no comment period. There was no input from parents, teachers, students, or administrators. None. So if we think about how this was implemented last administration, there was zero input, there was zero comment period offered. Teachers and students never had any say in how this was implemented. Number three, there's a reason that the Texas court had this matter enjoined. It's because it didn't follow the law and it had procedural problems. Four, as I mentioned, it's a state right issue. And then five is, I think that we do have to recognize that children do enjoy rights from, anti-bullying statutes that are in almost every state. And that there's a difference between being compassionate for individuals and children who are struggling with something and wanting to make sure they're protected, and how it's being done. And I think that the president has a big heart, as we've talked about in a lot of other issues, and there's a big difference. Personally, he addressed this issue when it came up with respect to one of his properties. But he also believes that that's not a federal, it's not a federal government issue. It's an issue left to the states, and it's an issue that, there's a reason in August of last year that the court enjoined this, because it hadn't followed the law, and it hadn't, the procedure, the comment period, and the solicitation of opinions and ideas wasn't followed. It was jammed down the process, and so we're actually following the law on this one, and I think that's the way it's supposed to be done. John, hold on.
If I could just follow on what April said. The Human Rights Campaign.
I wasn't finished. I'm sorry.
Okay. Well, I'm following on your question.
I understand.
Why don't we let April follow on, and then we'll get to John and Kristen and.
So I have one.
Brian.
I have something on another issue really fast, and John can do that. On the HBCU executive order, we understand the executive order that's coming out sometime later this month. It's supposed to open. You're working out issues of opening an office specifically to take the HBCU initiative out of the Department of Education and bring it directly under the purview of the White House. Who will be heading that? Have you figured that out? Have you also figured out how you will build that office out?
Yeah.
Because we understand that is one of the big pieces of this.
Well, respectfully, that's why it hasn't been issued yet. We're working it through the process. Obviously, that is something that we're committed to getting done by the end of Black History Month. So our days are numbered, but there's a commitment by the president and the staff to really focus on this issue and give it the proper respect that it deserves. So if you'll bear with us a couple more days, I promise you we'll have more to say on that.
So it will be a department with a full-time...
No, I just want to be clear. I'm not going to get into the details. It's sort of my blanket statement on non-issued executive orders. But I do know that there is a commitment by the President and the staff that he has been very clear with us that he wants that done by the end of this month for obvious reasons. John.
Let me get back to where we were. The Human Rights Campaign, in responding to rescinding the guidance last night, said that this is not a states' rights issue, it's a civil rights issue, and therefore is in the purview of the federal government. Do you disagree that this is a civil rights issue?
It's not. It's a question of where it's appropriately addressed, and I think there's a reason. Like, we've got to remember, this guidance was enjoined last August by a court. It hasn't been enforced. There was no comment period by anyone, by the Human Rights Campaign, by teachers, parents, students. Nobody had any input of this. And it seems to me a little interesting that if this was any other issue, people would be crying foul that the process wasn't followed. The reality is that when you look at Title IX, it was enacted in 1972. The idea that this was even contemplated at that is preposterous on its face. But that doesn't mean that the president obviously understands the issue and the challenges that especially young children face. He just believes that this is a state issue that needs to be addressed by states, as he does with a lot of other issues that we've talked about. And so we are a states' rights party. The president, on a lot of issues, believes in these various issues being states' rights. I don't see why this would be any different. And again, if you go through it, it's not just it's how the guidance was issued, it's the legal basis on which it was ordered. It fell short on a lot of stuff. It wasn't us that did this. It was the court that stepped in and said that they hadn't followed the procedure of the law back in August of last year and enjoined the case.
I understand all that. Just wondering, does the White House disagree with the position that this is a civil right?
Well, I think it's not a question of whether it's a civil right. It's where it's appropriately addressed. And as I noted, it's appropriately addressed at the state level. Kelly.
Sean, does the president personally believe that any student who is transgender should be able to use the bathroom of their choice? His personal belief?
I think the president believes it's a states' rights issue, and he's not going to get into determining. I understand what you're asking, Kelly, and I think that, as April pointed out, when the issue came to one of his own properties, he was very clear that, but again, what he doesn't want to do is force his issues or beliefs down. He believes it's a states' rights issue.
The public may want to know where the president is.
I understand that, and I think that he is very sympathetic to children who deal with that, and that this is up to states and schools within a particular district to address how they want to accommodate that, and not sort of be prescriptive from Washington. That's what the president believes. Zeke.
Thanks, Sean. You mentioned that this order was enjoined by a court, and there was criticism of the process. That exact same criticism has been levied on the administration's first executive order on the travel ban. I mean, can you help square the circle here? Why are you relying on that same, enjoined by a federal court criticism of the process for one, but not the other?
Well, I think there's a big difference. There's no way that you can read Title IX from 1972, anybody, and say that was even contemplated back then. It was. There's nobody that is possibly suggesting that the law that was passed in 1972 did that. Number two, there was zero comment period put forward on this guidance, which is in violation of how it was executed. Okay, and so there's a big difference. Hold on. Let me answer the question, Z. There is also a strong reading when you read, 1182 U.S. Code that it is very clear that the president does have the authority. So they are very much apples and oranges issues. One, it's very clear that the president is told by Congress in U.S. Code that he has the authority to do what's necessary to protect the American people. And there's no way that anybody above a fifth grade